Now, I want to show you the power of story and how it impacts us, how it shapes us, and how it shapes the world around us, how we see the world, and how we see ourselves in the world. Let's use the slavery narrative as an example. Now, as an aside, I refer to the slavery narrative as seditious narrative. Be that as it may, you have an entire people group whose identities, how they see themselves, the world, and their place in the world that is being shaped by the slavery narrative. Now ask yourself, who am I talking about? What is the people group that I'm talking about? Am I talking about black people? Or am I talking about white people? Or both? Remember, we are all being taught the same story. We're all being shaped by it. For instance, white people are now being taught to see themselves as the oppressor, blacks as the oppressed. Whites are being taught to see themselves as privileged by virtue of their pigmentation or lack thereof. Blacks to see themselves as a victim for the same reason. Remember, we're being taught that black equates to slave. And notice the story of blacks in America, it starts with the slave narrative. The whole point is that you were sold by your own people. Now, bear in mind that they are teaching slavery from a Hegelian dialectic dynamic, as above, so below. It's not just designed to have an impact on one group. It is the bringing together of opposites to create further division, strife, and tension. The more tension is built up, eventually it must be released. And sometimes that release is in the form of violence. Now, as we've already said, remember, when you connect with the story emotionally, your body reacts as if it's happening to you. So we now have an entire generation of people groups whose identity is being shaped by the slave narrative, even though none of them were either a slave or owned a slave. Based on the narrative, white people are seen as by definition necessarily evil. And again, it's all because of the slavery narrative. And it's because they owned people. Never mind the fact that there were black slave owners as well, and that only a very small percentage of people owned slaves. To that is that, well, you benefit from the system. What about the blacks who owned slaves? Do they also benefit from the system? I would say yes, they did at that time. At that time, that group did. And no one is willing to let facts get in the way of a good narrative. Now, this is why Marxists want critical race theory taught. I'm not against actual history being taught accurately. The problem with CTR is the agenda behind it, besides the fact that it's taught from a skewed perspective. But the agenda, it is designed to enslave people all over again. It is mental slavery, yes, but once you shackle the mind, the body isn't far behind. Let me say this for the Bible readers who might be listening. 1 Thessalonians 5:23 talks about the spirit, the soul, and the body. Listen, you are a tripart type being. You do not have a spirit. You are a spirit. You have a soul and you live in a body. The body is a slave, especially post-fall. It will either be a slave to your spirit man or your soulish area. In the soul, it is the seat of emotions. Again, we're either going to be a slave to our spirit man, a slave to our soulish area, or We will even be a slave to someone else. It's the body. Now, as an aside, white supremacy, the way it's taught today, it is an offshoot of the slavery narrative. Notice, the notion is that the biggest threat facing our nation today, it is a part of that narrative. That blacks need to be fearful, that we are powerless, that we're nothing more than victims, and that we need social justice warriors to protect us. We need the white liberal to be our daddy. In other words, we need the Democratic Party.